Hello, am I on? We're on. Good evening. If you're in this part of the world, it's good morning if you're in LA, as is our guest today, Ms. Shelly Bond, who is about as phenomenal a guest as we've ever had, I would say, at Octagon. We are honored very much to have her here today to talk about her, hopefully about her incredible work, to answer all of our awkward questions. And we try not to fawn too much. I'm very good at it though. Shelly has recently kickstarted a thing called Filth and Grammar, which I want to talk about in great detail at some point, but I really shouldn't, because I should listen in great detail, which is something I'm not quite so good at. Shelly, you're in LA. Good morning. How are things over there?
Good morning. Well, it's very hot right now in LA. I'm drinking tea anyway. I just wanted to make sure you realize that. It's early. I'm trying to stay awake. I just wanted to thank you for, I think, what is quite possibly the most gushing, kind introduction I've ever received in my life.
Well, I can beat it, but I won't. I noticed that mug is filthy. Why does it have the word filth on that mug? That's very strange.
I think you know the answer to that question. Yeah, now, come on.
Is it because of Filth and Grammar?
It might be.
You have to tell us about Filth and Grammar. I know we probably should start at the very beginning. I think there's a song about that. But I think I want to start with Filth and Grammar. Tell us about Filth and Grammar. Why is it so important to you?
Well, Filth and Grammar is my magnum opus. So let's just say I've been in comics possibly longer than you. I'm sure you're younger than me. So let's just stop right there and agree that you're probably younger than me. I've been in comics since 1988.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You started comics before I did, but in 1988 I was I don't know, 18. I have no idea what old I was.
All right.
No, I was born in 66, so I'm definitely older than you are, you know.
No, you're not. I was born in 66 as well.
Oh.
And unlike you, I have a feeling you probably got into comics because of the amazing British comics that you had growing up. Am I right?
Absolutely, yeah.
You read Judge Dredd and 2088.
I'm very familiar with Judge Dredd, yes.
You probably read Deadline magazine too.
I have the very first issue. It's over there, actually. Yes. So,
excellent. Yeah. So unlike you, I was not a comics fan. I was not into superheroes. I am still not into superheroes. No offense to anyone listening, but I had gotten into comics in college, and the only big connection I have to comics from when I was a child was I was really into the Peanuts gang. So I loved Charles Schultz, and I just loved reading the Peanuts books and, of course, the cartoons. But I got into comics through a screenwriting class, which everyone thinks is weird, but I don't think it's that weird. You know, basically it was 1987. I'd spent a semester in London from January to June in 1987, came back to Ithaca College, upstate New York, for my final year in college, and had to take a screenwriting class at 8 o'clock in the morning. Now, I was not happy about it for like a million reasons, mostly because it was 8 o'clock in the morning, but also because I wanted to be in London. I didn't want to come home. I had the best semester abroad, and I was just not happy being back on campus. But my screenwriting teacher showed us how storyboarding worked by holding up a copy of Empire Lanes, which was an indie comic book by Peter Gross. It was black and white. And that was the moment that my life changed forever, because that was when I realized that comics was like storyboarding. So to me, it was like looking at little French New Wave films, and I was fascinated. So, you know, here I was, you know, wanted to go to school to be a filmmaker, wanted to just move to London and become an auteur, had high hopes of maybe meeting Nicholas Roeg on the street and having him ask me to work with him, right? Or Agnes Varda, or even like, you know, the French New Wave, becoming the next godmother of the French New Wave. And instead,
godmother, yes.
Right? Yeah. So instead, I became fascinated with comics. And there was a kid in my class who said, hey, if you like that comic, there are tons more at the comic book store. It's a really great time to read comics, because it was, as you remember, it was a boom in indie publishing. So this kid, who turned out to be Will Dennis, who would later become a great editor at Vertigo, thanks to yours truly, I paid him back. You know, for me, he rolled out the red carpet at our local comic book shop, and I discovered Love and Rockets, which hands down is the reason I'm in comics. And also Grendel by Matt Wagner. I have to give him props. Matt was also my first art crush, which I talk about a little bit in Filth and Grammar. And I came in at a time where even mainstream comics were doing unique things. So there was epic comics. So I read Moonshadow, and I got really into Bill Sienkiewicz's work, not the superhero stuff per se, but the more painterly work. You know, I really liked Electra Assassin because I liked his technique. Wasn't a huge Frank Miller fan. Read a couple of things from DC, started Hellblazer right from the get-go, but mostly indie, and it's in my blood. And that's where I am today. You know, I kind of, after leaving Vertigo, I sort of went back to my roots, and I'm all about not only indie comics, but punk comics, DIY, making comics yourself, understanding every part of the process, which is vast. And if I can't be amazing at every part of the process, at least I can say I tried.
Well, of course, you have the ability to, if you find yourself not amazing or by your own standards, you can hire other people who are amazing. We've seen that certainly with Filth and Grammar, the list of your three collaborators, your artists are, I mean, they're I have the list here: Imogen Mangle, is that correct?
Yep.
Mangle, Laura Hall and Sophie Dodgson, who are extremely talented. But do you not feel as an editor you're giving creative power to other people? Is that not I suppose, is that just being overly generous, or is that because you can see their strengths?
Well, if you want to really talk about Filth and Grammar, you know, the idea behind doing a memoir has been with me since the 90s. I mean, I used to always say that being a comic book editor is the greatest job that no one knows about. And back in those days, you know, from 88 maybe through 96, 97, it really was, you know, I would find myself having to explain over and over again what I did for a living, not just to my parents, who thought it was rather peculiar. They sent me to film school, you know, to spend 40 grand on my education, and I'm a comic book editor. You know, meanwhile, as a feminist, you know, it was a little surprising. People used to think that I was editing superheroes. And if there's one thing that bothered me the most, was the fact that when I would say comic book editor, people would say, well, how can you edit comic books that feature women running around in bikinis and high heels? And I'd be like, whoa.
Yeah. I
was lucky enough to edit comic books that were nothing like that, and that actually empowered women and empowered people and empowered storytellers. And I like to think that working at places like Comico, which was one of the first creator-owned comic book companies, and Vertigo, that we paved new ground for not just for women, you know, but for women to be represented in comics as so much more than just sidekicks or love interests. So being a comic book editor to me is still the greatest job that no one knows about. But now in 2021, Filth and Grammar, I hope, will change what people think a comic book editor does for a living. And we get a bad rap because there are a lot of people that don't know what the job's about, and it's all encompassing. You know, unlike a book editor where perhaps, you know, you are working one-on-one with just an author and you are helping to structure the book and copy edit, maybe improve grammar syntax. A comic book editor is an art director. A comic book editor is master control. So you are constantly interacting with everyone on the team. And unlike working on a novel where again, it's a one-on-one experience with the editor and the author, and also with the author and the reader, a comic book is the ultimate pass the baton. It's a collaboration unlike any other. And the editor is that central point, that red pen. The editor's job is to make everyone on the team look good at all times and to get the job done on time. And knowing that finished has to be better than perfect when you're on a monthly schedule. And it's the most invigorating job on earth.
So yeah, you do seem to, I mean, it's no secret that you love it, that it's basically it's in your soul. If you're like a stick of rock, if you remember the sticks of rock you used to have in the UK when you were there, it's, if we cut you open, it would be comics all the way through.
Oh yeah.
But I do like what you said about starting off with something like Love and Rockets, because a lot of people wouldn't be familiar necessarily with Love and Rockets these days. But I remember in the mid to late 80s, they were when the graphic novel boom really kicked off with things like Watchmen and The Dark Knight Returns. And then suddenly Titan Books were publishing every comic ever they could get their hands on, and I got the first bunch of volumes, Love and Rockets, the Jamie and Gilbert Hernandez. My God, they're fantastic books. And what I loved about them was that they didn't need to be people being rescued and people being in danger and all that sort of stuff. They were stories about people, not about events. And they changed the way I looked at that stage. I was calling myself a writer, even though I hadn't written much. I hadn't quite made the connection that to be a writer, you have to write. They changed the way I looked at things. And subsequently, and we're going to do a little bit of butt kissing here, nothing that changed the way I looked at things was Fables. By the way, Fable. Oh, this.
Yes.
Now, where are we? Yeah,
How did that get there?
Yeah.
How did that get there? And let's just mention that you have the entire collection.
I do.
Above that.
Yeah.
That
I would. Yeah. Up there. I'm gonna move the camera so the ladies and gentlemen at home can see.
You really are kissing butt today.
I'm very good at it. Yeah.
Let me just backtrack with you for 1 minute about the Hernandez brothers. So I think both Gilbert and Jaime are the greatest cartoonists of our generation. And I put the two of us in their generation. Yeah. I mean, they were finally inducted into the Will Eisner Hall of Fame a few years ago, and that should have happened 25 years ago. They are both outstanding cartoonists and wonderful people. I've worked with Gilbert numerous times in my career, and I've gotten to know his family, and they're just terrific. One of the things that they do better than anyone else, and I don't mind if you quote this, I'll put it on a t-shirt. Their comics are not only beautifully drawn and crafted, but they capture what goes on beneath, in between the panel borders. They capture what goes on between characters, things that should have been said. Yeah. And that is the art of comics. To me, I think the problem with a lot of people who think that writing comics must be easy is that they don't understand that great comics are about choosing what to say, what to show, and what to leave out for the reader to deduce. And I think both Gilbert and Jaime do that better than anyone, and they do it in spades. And you're right, their comics are about life, the human condition. And I love how they're not afraid to, show all of the inconsistencies that we have as people. I mean, we're all hypocrites. We're all annoying. The fact that Jaime would show his characters aging and gaining weight and getting bad haircuts. I mean, we could go on and on for days, but I do love explaining to people who might not be aware of Love and Rockets is that it's punk rock for so many reasons. Both the Hernandez brothers started when they were young, and they continue to this day making comics their way. And that's exactly what I'd like to think I'm doing by self-publishing with my husband through Off Register Press and using a crowdfunding platform like Kickstarter. I think that anyone that wants to make comics is living in the greatest time to make comics, which is today, because nothing should hold you back. There are so many ways to connect with other people who share your sensibility and make comics the way you want to make them and be fearless. And it's all about whether you can actually step up and swing and just get it done. And I think fear stops people, and it's ridiculous. We cover that in my book, Filth and Grammar.
Yeah, I think that is it's a very, very good point. It is about overcoming the fear. There's always the there's always an excuse not to create. There's always that, oh, I can't afford it, I can't do this, I can't do that. In the olden days, when we were younger, there was the 80s and 90s, we couldn't create comics because we couldn't physically produce unless we were lucky enough to work in a place that had a photocopier, we couldn't physically produce the work in a way that people could read it. Now that barrier is pretty much gone because people can create online. So I think we need to see more creators coming apart and fast. We need to see a huge diversity of creators as well. We need to get rid of the idea that comics are for middle-aged or younger men, white males in particular. We need to get beyond that and into diversity. And I think the anonymity of the internet gives us a chance to do that. If people are afraid to read a comic written by women, and I know guys who are our age who won't read comics if they've got female creators.
And that's ridiculous. I have to tell you that the thing about comics right now, I mean, there's of course good and bad with social media, and there's good and bad, working with a corporation versus self-publishing. But I think at the end of the day, you just have to look the other way. There are always going to be haters. There are always going to be people who doubt you, who make you feel like you can't accomplish something. The best thing you can do is pivot. If somebody is really trying to stop you from living your dream, whatever it is. And that's something that I've always believed in. I was fortunate enough to have parents who, believed in me. And I was fortunate enough to have a sister who didn't mind running my father's dry cleaning empire. So I could go on and make comics for life. So I always like to give a shout out to my sister, Randy, because without her, I might be a pants presser. Like my dad didn't want to work in his father's business, but went on to run the business because we come from a family business. He wanted to play a saxophone in a Broadway theater. Because he couldn't do that, he really wanted me and he wanted my sister to do exactly what we wanted to do with our lives. And strangely enough, my sister just wanted to work with my dad and run his business. And that was fortunate for me because I get to edit comics for life. And that's the coolest thing ever.
Well, you say for life. Do you think you'll do this for life? You desire to do anything beyond comics?
Are you kidding me? 33 years? Of course. I mean, it's like you said, it's in my soul. It's in my bones. I think that my two great loves are music and comics. And I think it's been my raisons d'etre to be doing this and finding ways to combine my two great loves forever. And I was able to do it to some extent at Vertigo, but much more when Philip and I came up with the Black Crown imprint for IDW. And that was something else. We ran that from 2017 to 2019. And we were gutted that it couldn't continue onward, but we had 2.5 solid years of doing comics exactly as we wanted to do them. And we have 10 trades to prove it. So that, I think, is the best example of what you can do when a company believes in you and gives you the space and freedom to actually curate and create profound works that represent your ideal.
Excellent. Yeah, well, I mean, I definitely believe that the people with the money needs to trust the people with the vision. If they don't do that, they end up with less money. In your case with Vertigo, you were there, as you say, for 22 years, and you produced a huge body of work. Have you ever clicked on yourself on comics.org, the Grand Comics database? There's like 50 pages of stuff with Shelly Bond's name attached.
Wow.
Incredible work, and I don't think you possibly realize how influential you have been. But then, of course, the thing about editors is that you are, to some degree, the invisible creators. I know that's also true of letterers. They still, I'm sure you've said that if someone notices a good letterer's work, then if those letters work, they haven't done a good job. But the editors I've worked with in comics, some of them have been phenomenally hard workers, incredibly imaginative, incredibly intelligent, and they just producing fantastic work, and people don't know who they are.
Well, and that's sad. And I don't think editing should be invisible, honestly. My whole manifesto in comics from when I started at Kamiko, and I was editing books in 1989 because it was a small company. I was very lucky. I've always felt like it was important to plant your flag and to show your stripes. And so for me, it was, I wanted my books to be, you know, very pop, you know, in the 90s, certainly Britpop fueled my existence. So I was a huge fan of many of the British bands that you may or may not like.
Yeah.
Now, if we talk music, we might have to end this interview early. So maybe we'll
no,
stick with
no.
comics.
I'm a huge fan of certain 90s Britpop. Well, one.
Well, we better not go there because we know about the Britpop wars, and if we could, there could be blood.
Yes, there could be. As
So
long as you
let's stick
agree
with
that
comics.
Suede is the best band, we're fine, you know.
Suede is amazing. Suede is one of the best bands of the 90s.
Good. Yes.
Dogman's Star for the win. Okay.
It is a fantastic album. Yeah.
But one of the things I wanted to say, to go back to your point about editors being invisible, I really think that that's a shame. I don't think editors should be invisible. And speaking of the Invisibles, that was a book that I actually worked on starting with volume 2. And my plan with that book was to bring it to a wider audience.
Yeah.
At the time, Stuart Moore was the first editor of the book with Grant Morrison. For people who don't know, it was, I think, one of the most revolutionary creator-owned series of the 90s. It was Grant's, it was the Matrix before the Matrix.
Yes,
I mean, Grant has always been a visionary. I mean, he really is, I think, a comic book apocalypse, as he's been called over the years. Unfortunately, the first volume of his trilogy did not sell as well as everybody had hoped. And again, I think it was the timing. It was 94. I don't know if people were ready for it. So when Stuart Moore, who was editing the book, launched his own science fiction imprint called Matrix, which you might, Helix. It was supposed to be called Matrix, and then it had to be changed to Helix because of the Matrix.
Yes.
My boss, Karen Berger, asked me if I wanted to take the reins of editing The Invisibles with volume 2 and volume 3. And I said, absolutely. But if we were going to have any hope of relaunching and gaining a wider audience to get to the third volume, as Grant envisioned it, I needed to make some big changes. So I started by firing people. And that is one of the most important jobs that an editor can do. You know, it's never personal. And in fact, Sean Phillips, who is still a great friend, I love him to death, I had to fire him off the covers, which, as you know, is ridiculous because he was one of the greatest painters of the 90s, I think, with Duncan Fegredo, Chris Pacelli, Brian Bolland. But I wanted to have a new look, and I couldn't just do it by hiring the same painter. I needed 100% shock value when volume 2 came out. So I had to fire Sean. I promised I'd make it up to him. And I did years later. I put him on a few of my other titles, The Vinyl Underground, for instance. But I wanted Brian Bolland. And I had to fire the letterer, Clem Robbins, because just like you said, you know, the letterer is as important to the book as the cover artist, as the logo designer, as the colorist, as the penciler, inker. So sadly, I had to fire Clem Robbins, who I adored personally, but I hired Todd Klein because I wanted everything on the book to look fresh and new. And we had a completely different direction. Whereas the first volume was very much, I would say, a salute to British culture. The team went to America with the second volume. So our tagline was Bloody Hell in America, which I came up with and then just went to town. So I think what people don't realize is the editor is possibly the silent partner, possibly the silent idea person, but so integral in making sure that everyone on the team is working hard and working on time and working with the best they've got. And if somebody is having problems in their personal life, getting them assistance, you know, knowing when to call a page a finished page and to bring it in and to get that book to the printer and to keep the train moving and to keep the energy moving forward. It's always the forward imperative. And I think it was really sad when the Eisners took away the best editor Eisner Award. And I think that happened in like maybe the early 90s. It's been a shame for everybody because I think there have been so many amazing editors to come through comics. And like you said, people won't know their names. I think that's also one of the reasons why I want Filth and Grammar to come to life and why I sort of shifted gears with the book. I'd always wanted to write a graphic memoir, but I wasn't sure how much to focus on myself. What I find fascinating is how it's done. I'm a deconstructivist by nature. In college, I like to edit film, hot splicing, and I love to edit videotape. So I really do love pulling things apart. I love David Bowie's whole philosophy with Station to Station, where he wrote lyrics, cut them up.
Yeah, like the William Burroughs method of
exactly.
Yeah.
That's very much me. And when I started in comics, there wasn't anything I could read about the job. And so to this day, there is no primer, there is no book written about comics from an editor's point of view. So I wanted to change all that. And that's why Filth and Grammar is currently in the works and very close to completion, I might add. I think we have about 5 weeks of fine tuning, but we have spent the summer, which, as you noticed, we even have the merchandise. We've called it the summer of Filth and Grammar. And we have been going from tiny speck of an idea about what is this book about to bringing it to life and updating our Kickstarter backers. There are 2,375 generous people who have believed in us, and we will not let them down. The book is due in their hands in March, and we are well on our way and having a blast.
The people who pledged in total more than 4 times the amount you actually looked for to begin with. It's been massively successful for Kickstarter. I'm just raging. I didn't get in on the ground floor. How can people who haven't pledged as a Kickstarter, how will they be able to get hold of copies of the book when it's ready? Will we be able to buy it in the stores?
Well, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked. I've been kickstarting for the past 5 years, and I absolutely love the platform. My husband and I have a website and a company called offregister.press. And we not only have many of our self-published titles available there, but Philip, my husband, also has a wonderful collection of 12 by 12 inch record cover sized prints in black and white that he sells on our website. So if you just go to our website, you'll see we have a store. And as always, when I do a Kickstarter, I overprint like crazy because I know that a lot of people still have no idea what a Kickstarter is. And for whatever reason, they miss out. The thing that I really hope that people that back this book and that people that want this book understand that I'm pretty much making a handbook, the handbook that I never had. All through my years of editing. I was so lucky, I not only worked with terrific mentors back in the 80s at Kamiko. My first boss was Diana Schutt. So she hired me. She gave me the opportunity. I'm grateful. She taught me a lot about grammar, syntax. She is like a pedant, unlike any other. So she's like the English authority. I was like a film student. So I took art classes. I took 3D design. I took sculpture. I took filmmaking. Didn't have a lot of English. So I was like, working with Diana was like English boot camp. So I'm going to give her the props for getting me back into a really important way of thinking when it comes to the hardcore bones of editing, typos, misplaced modifiers, etc. But Rick Taylor was my greatest mentor in terms of storytelling and art directing. And he really showed me the ropes on how it was done, especially in the early days before digital. So I learned how to burnish a letter column, which means put glue on the back of it and burnish it with a roller down on paper, and learn how to mark up artboards with blue pencil so that the artist would know where to make a correction, on a board. And he also taught me about color theory and I learned how to color comics with a paintbrush and Doc Martin water dyes long before computers. So one of the things I love about this book is I have this dialogue with myself, and I call it Shelly then, when I had a black bob, and a long fringe covering half my face. So Shelly then was very much old school, it was really before the digital revolution. So there are times in the book where I might show a page of coloring, and it's exactly how I learned. It's painted with marker or water dye, and there's pencil marks that tell you exactly the percentage of the code of how much, what color should be in that particular area of the panel. Because I'm gonna hold something up. This is a black and white image, in fact.
Ooh.
This image will be colored by my former mentor, Rick Taylor.
Wow.
And if I can, I'll just explain to you in the book. There are 8 chapters. Each chapter goes through each of the stages of making a comic, from idea to pitch to plot to outline to script to what I call script autopsy, which is using this or a scalpel or a sledgehammer, depending on your work. So Michael, if you're ever thinking of working with me, you should be afraid.
Oh, I am. Yes.
We go through pencils, inks, lettering, color. And in the inking section, what I did, which I hope people will appreciate, our penciler is 22 years old. She's phenomenal. She's the next art star, mark my words. But Imogen Mangle did the pencils of this, which is our eponymous album cover for our group, our quartet of creators on Filth and Grammar. Imogen did the pencils, and I hired 4 inkers to ink her because she's never been inked by anyone else.
Wow.
So this is inked by Craig Hamilton, who is an exquisite artist. I mean,
Yeah.
pencils and inks and sculpts and paints things on his own. He's our generation, but as an inker, he is just unbelievable. And Rick Taylor will be coloring this piece with Doc Martin water dyes and coating it like we did in the old days. So you'll see the ink on one page, you'll see the coloring on the other page, and then you'll see the digital color by Sophie Dodgson, who is not only our main colorist in the book, but she's also the designer of the book. So the book itself is part old school, here's how we did it, part new school, because everyone who I hired to work with me on the book is under 30, because I'm not lazy. I could have just reached out to a bunch of friends.
Yeah,
I do that too, but the bulk of the book is by this young team. Laura Hull, who is a terrific spot illustration designer. She's a master of zines, and in fact, she does a section on how to make a zine. And then we have Imogen Mangle, who is fresh out of art school, very inspired by manga, a huge fan of Becky Cloonan and Brian Lee O'Malley. This is her first major work. She's doing all the sequentials that start off each chapter. So basically, we get 4 to 5 pages at the beginning of each chapter, and it's called A Day in the Life of the Comic Book Ingenue. And it's basically a moment in time with the comic book ingenue. It is sometimes funny, sometimes ridiculous, but hopefully it's a fun way to start each chapter and show a little bit about my life, mostly in the 90s, the 80s and the 90s, to show what a comic book editor does on a daily basis. And it's exhausting. And so if you don't like the kind of books where people rip the patina off, take you behind the scenes by the throat, show you the truth of what the job entails, if that scares you, Michael, don't read the book.
It actually entices me more than anything else. I have to say, I do like going behind the scenes, seeing what's behind the green curtain, as it were. I think it's going to be a fantastic book. I've known your work as an editor for many years, and I know it's going to be amazing. What I'm kind of jealous about is that I didn't think of it myself. However, I've only edited a tiny handful of things, so I'm not really qualified. But it looks like it's going to be awesome.
Well,
there is one thing I think that I don't know if it's something you'll cover in the book. You possibly do, but if we talk of the editor being invisible and they shouldn't be, why is it that we have in the movie industry and TV industry, the directors are big names, especially in movies, but when in comic books, the editor is effectively the equivalent of a director and producer,
yeah.
I suppose, but
Yes.
somehow no one buys books because an editor is involved.
It's sad, and I hope this book will help change that, to be honest. I think that people, they react to what they see instantly, and I talk about this in the cover section. I'm a huge fan of Milton Glaser. I live by his edict. there are 3 responses you should have to a piece of art: yes, no, or wow. And I will not commission a cover unless I say wow. So people that work with me, whether they're old friends, you know, that I've worked with for 20 years, or new artists, I will have them do 10 sketches if I'm not wowed, because there's so much content out there. You know, and I say content, there are comics, there's streaming, there's TV, film. I mean, every day I'm just blown away by how much information is out there trying to get our attention. It's tough to be original, and I refuse to be arch. So as an editor, I really want to be blown away, and I really want to be inspired to spend my money on something to entertain me. You know, I mean, I feel like comics are the ultimate escape, but also hopefully they're educating us, even if it's behind our backs. And with Filth and Grammar, you know, I just wanted to tell you, part of the joy of working on the book is that I set myself up to fall on my face. And what I mean by that is I'm not a writer by trade. So I've done a lot of writing for comics. And in fact, I think my old boss, Karen Berger, used to say that she really liked my cell copy when I had to audition for my position as an assistant editor. We had to do an extensive grammar test. We had to do a writing test where we write sample solicitation copy, you know, sales copy for the books. And she used to say that she liked my copy, but I'm not technically a comic book writer. And I challenged myself to become one, because as I was writing the prose section of Filth and Grammar, I was really starting to get tired of my own voice. And I knew I wanted to write some short comics, but I decided to pivot. And that's a word that I've just had in my life since I was a baton twirler. I twirled the baton, I tap danced since the 70s. To pivot is the greatest thing you can learn how to do in life, because all it means is shifting gears. Mm-hmm. So when I had my own roadblock with writing Filth and Grammar, I decided to pivot, and I decided to start writing sequential comics. And that's why we have each chapter opening with a day in the life, because I started to say to myself, you know, writing comics is, I think, it's less scary than writing prose, because not all of your words will be left on the page. Mm-hmm. Because my editing style is bring on the sledgehammer. You know, you have to cut as much out as possible. I don't like repetition. So you want to make sure you're not saying and showing the same thing. When you're writing a comic book script, I think a lot of people don't realize that you're writing the art direction. And that's why to say a comic book editor isn't an art director, honestly, is a crime. In fact, I'll say it's immoral to say that, because not only is the editor an art director, but so is the writer. You have to understand the parlance of the artist, of the inker, of the colorist, if you want to not only write comics, but edit comics. Because why should anyone take you seriously if you don't know the difference between a vanishing point and a horizon line? Why should anyone take you seriously if you don't know how to structure a page of writing? So I pretty much rolled up my sleeves and I started writing comics. And in fact, one of the best parts of this is that not only will I be writing comics that Imogen is bringing to life, but I write a story about a rumor. I don't know if you know that back in the 80s, DC Comics sent Peter Milligan to America on a very brief tour, but he was writing about the United States. He was writing Shade the Changing Man, and he had not been to the States. So I believe Karen Berger organized a trip for him so that he could come to the States and at least get familiar with what it was like to spend a little time in the States. So I asked Milligan, as he's called, if I could write a short story about the rumors I heard about him living the life of a British person in America, you know, to do some research. And he said that was okay as long as he could edit it. So that is, I got to tell you, that's the high point of the book for me, because I think I've edited more Peter Milligan scripts than any other in my career. Perhaps not maybe Bill Willingham,
Well,
maybe Bill Willingham, but Peter Milligan a close second. We were working together on Hellblazer for almost 5 years. So it's up, he's up there. But I am sure he is just cackling as I'm talking to you right now, because to be able to bring out his own knives on my prose, could you imagine? Wouldn't that be like a writer's dream?
oh yeah. Yeah, no, that is, I've had the pleasure to edit an editor once before, and Revenge was so sweet, except that they were right and I was wrong. But aside from that, but we've just been told we have our 10-minute warning, unfortunately, because this is annoying, because I have 1,000 more questions I could ask. We have a couple of questions in from the audience, if you don't mind me bouncing them at you.
Sure.
When you have a change in a creative team in the middle of an auteur comic run, that very well said, whoever wrote that, how do you keep the whole finished run true to the remaining creators and true to the new part of the team too? That's not easy.
That's a great question. And the answer to that is communication. Mm-hmm. You only work with people that you know will do the job and will work well with others. And I think that one of the problems in comics is that people don't communicate, whether they're afraid. A lot of people, like we talked about firing, number one job for the editor, hire the right people for the job. Number two job for the editor, fire the people that you hired for the job if they're not the right people. And what does that mean? It means they don't show up, they take too long to do the job, they're difficult, or the work isn't to your satisfaction. And I love that question, because it brings up a really good example. When I was working on Lucifer, I was handed the book, and Mike Carey was the writer. He's a wonderful man.
Yes, he's
phenomenal.
Awesome. He was a guest of honor at TalkCon a few years ago. So yeah,
he is a phenomenal writer. He is a absolute star of a person. When we started working together on Lucifer, we hired Chris Weston, who is a mind-blowing artist and also AAA+ person. Yep. And I worked with Chris on The Invisibles. We got on like a house on fire. He's also a Suede fan. It was all great. But after 3 issues on Lucifer, he just didn't enjoy working on the book. The subject matter wasn't for him. We were devastated, but we knew we couldn't talk him into staying. And that was a great example of how do we make the segue from Chris Weston to anyone in the world? Because Chris Weston, seriously, is one of the finest. Our generation, one of the top 10.
One of the nicest people you could meet. He's a lovely guy. Yeah.
So we basically segued. We had smart editors don't just hire one regular artist for the job. They hire a regular guest artist for the job. So at that time, we had hired Dean Ormston. Again, AAA+ person, phenomenal storyteller. We hired him to be our regular guest artist. So we had an issue where his artwork would sort of be the segue. And fortunately enough, we reached out to Peter Gross, who at that time had just finished Books of Magic, terrific draftsman, wonderful storyteller. We were lucky to connect with Peter. So hiring someone who is seasoned to come in and bridge the gap. So Peter came in, and instead of just coming in and making something 100% different, that was a 180, I think we eased into it. And I will tell you that what Peter brought to Lucifer was a stability. He was in it for the long haul. He had just finished a long series. And Peter was also known for his layups, which a lot of people, we go to Peter to show younger artists unique ways of storytelling. So what we did was we worked with Dean, and we had Dean and Peter create a wonderful rhythm and flow to both the guest artist issues, where Peter would do roughs for Dean, and then we brought in inkers to work with Peter. So we were able to stay on the schedule. So Peter worked with a few different inkers, and we were able to pull off the impossible. Not only did we keep the book running on schedule, we had what I think was a very organic segue. If you go back through the Lucifer issues, yep. I think what you also see is synergy between Mike Carey and Peter Gross. because I think Mike became a better writer working with Peter, because Peter was also a fine writer. So that was a situation which could have been horrendous when someone leaves a book. But when you communicate, you bring everyone in and you have, stylistically, you have people that actually flow nicely together. It can happen. It can work, and it can go on to 76 issues, which is what Lucifer finished with. And it became a TV show. So there you go.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's, well, I mean, when we, myself and my wife first, we hadn't really read Lucifer apart from a couple of issues here and there. But when we met Mike when he was at, guess what, Octocom, we said, he's such a nice guy. We want to buy all the books. So that's why I have the full set of Lucifer there. We bought them in one go. But oh my God, it's amazing stuff. I mean, I don't want to say that it's better than Sandman, because I get killed if I do, but it is.
It's up there.
It's wonderful work. But we're down to 5 minutes. Shelly, I do have other questions, but I think I would like to I'd like to ask you more about Filth and Grammar, because I know it's the big thing. But before we do, you also did last year? Insider Art was last year. Last year or this year? Insider Art, which was a beautiful piece of work. And that was nicely done. Yeah.
This little thing you talk about. Thank you so much.
That's the one. Wow.
This book, it means the world to me. Thank you for mentioning it. Beautiful. I think this is the first pandemic. This is the first reaction to the pandemic, if I'm not mistaken. We put this together. This is over 100 female and non-binary creators got together last May 2020. We were all just horrified about what was going on with the pandemic. I pretty much challenged 8 editors to come up with 20 to 25 pages of content. The premise I came up with was this: it's a house, it's overrun by cats, we're stuck inside, everybody gets a room. I took the garage, so of course I wanted the garage band. And there were 7 other editors who helped me out. And within 3 months, we put together a 256-page collection, all ages, of comics, crafts, and cats. And I am so proud of it. And I want to just give a shout out to everyone who worked on the book. People donated their time and their energy, and it gave me a chance to design. So I got to letter and design, which, by the way, we talk about editing. I say to everyone out there who wants to be an editor, try your hand at everything. You're not going to be great at everything, but at least you can say you can do it. Learn the parlance. Insider Art was such a great place for people to actually learn a new skill. Liana Kangas asked us if she could write and draw a story. It's terrific. It's her first publishing credit as a writer. So it was a wonderful time to create art, and it's still available on Gumroad. All the proceeds from this book, and I think we raised over $7,000 by now. All the proceeds go to female and non-binary comic book retailers, because so many organizations are kind to retailers. But I can't think of anyone that went out of their way to specifically help female and non-binary comic book retailers. So that's what this book did. And as you can see, it is just jam-packed with amazing art and cats. I mean, cats galore. So if you like comics,
with that.
Cats,
yeah, we have 2 of our own. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you for bringing that up. The highlight of our pandemic years for me was that book.
Well, it is a masterpiece. It's a beautiful piece of work, but I just know that it is going to be equaled, possibly even surpassed, by Filth and Grammar, which I really can't wait for. I think we have to go now. I'm going to get shot if we don't. I do want to say, Shelly, thank you so much for being so amazing anyway, but also being so amazing for us. You have been an inspiration to so many people, and long may you continue to be so. You're incredibly gifted, annoyingly talented. It's just infuriating that you're so good. I'm sorry.
Oh my God.
But yeah, you are. And also, by the way, I just dropped this in.
I think my father must be writing you checks. I mean,
Yes,
seriously, you
yes.
are definitely piling it on. But thank you.
No,
Thank
you're
you.
very welcome. Seriously, you've done amazing work, and I think the age of the editor needs to come upon us. It needs to be we need to be buying books with the editor's name across the top, not
Agreed.
just the creators. It's your time, I think, and you should be the spearhead of that. So
thank you. Viva Comics.
absolutely.
Be fearless.
Like this, and we will hopefully we'll see you again, maybe at a future Octocon or some similar event. Perhaps maybe when the veils lift and the borders drop, we'll come to Ireland someday and pay a visit in real life.
I would love to. Absolutely. No, thank you so much for inviting me. It's been so much fun chatting with you.
Well, thank you so much. You have been a delight in every respect.
Back at you.
Thank you very much. And we will say bye-bye. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you for watching. And
thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Viva Comics.
Bye.